Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I am delighted to welcome you to yet another ADI webinar. I am Paola Berberino, and I am the CEO of Alzheimer's Disease International. Thank you for being with me today. I hope you can see the slides. I now would like to give special thanks to our sponsors. So this is the first slide about the Dementia Research in Action from Trial to Treatments, which is the title of our webinar. And now special thanks to the donors. As always, thank you so much to our corporate partners and donors who are noted here. I would particularly like to thank this time Roche and Eisai for their support, which includes enabling us to host activities such as this webinar and allow us to share more information on this important theme of dementia research and clinical trials. Now, after we've done that, the next slide is going to ask you some questions. Whilst we do that, and if you voted ours already, we're going to have a little poll about who are you. So who is in our audience today? If you could please click one of the boxes that gives me and my fellow panelists some idea of who you are and therefore how to frame our discussion at the end better. So we have held this now for a few seconds. We'll wait another few seconds and we are going to wrap up the poll now and see what did we get. So we have quite a lot of medical professionals in industry today with a good mix of educators, researchers, and academics, and also a smattering of media representatives, people who live with dementia and other, which eventually we probably will ask you what those was. So thank you very much. We are going to now pass to the next slide, which is about ADI. And whilst I do that, if I can remind you that our webinars are very interactive, you're all very welcome to introduce yourself to the audience on the chat line. So tell us who you are, where you're calling from. And then later in the webinar, I will ask you to post your questions for us to answer them in the Q&A box. You may have noticed, if you follow us regularly, that I'm going slowly today. That is because I only have 4 panelists, which is wonderful because this will allow me not to rush for once. This is a complex topic that we are facing today. And we wanted to give ourselves the time for people to really understand the issues, underline it. So hopefully we'll have time for a full Q&A also at the end. Now, about ADI, we were established in 1984. We are the umbrella organization of 105 Alzheimer's and Dementia Associations around the world. We are a non-state actor within the WHO system, and we are an ECOSOC body within the United Nations system. We also represent you at OECD, at the G7, G20, and a lot of other global and regional bodies. We also are the promoter of World Alzheimer's Month and the publisher of the World Alzheimer's Report. But as it says in our strapline, we are here to promote care, support, inclusivity now whilst we wait for a cure tomorrow. But that cure is arriving quite rapidly, and this is one of the reasons today why we are tackling the topic of clinical trials. To the right, you can see the symbols of all the associations that are part of the ADI network. And as you can see, there are all the colors in the world in our network. Next slide, please. Now, as ever, I'm going to ask you if you have the capacity to do that, to give us a donation. We are a non-for-profit organization and we are funded and supported by generous donations. I must say, after each webinar, we are nowadays surprised that people are making quite large donations. And for all of you that have done that now and in the past, I really, really want to thank you because this is having a maximum impact and is really helping us deliver more. So thank you so much. And you have a handy QR code if you want to do that straight away. But otherwise, there's plenty of information on our website. Now, whilst I'm giving you all time to log in and introduce yourself, I'll do another couple of slides about our forthcoming events. Next slide, please. The first one, which you should be registering for as soon as you finish this webinar today, is the end of year forecast. Last year I did it on new treatments with Professor Jeff Cummins. Today, this year is going to be with Dr. Ali Reza Atri on the diagnostic revolution. Are we ready? What does it mean for us? So it's going to be a one-to-one discussion on the 10th of December, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. In London time, and it's going to be live streamed. So if you're interested, please register today. The second date for your diary, there's going to be more webinars, but right now the date that you really should have in your calendar is the 14th to 16th of April, our global conference in Lyon. ADI does a global conference only every 2 years. So this is an extraordinary opportunity. I really would like to thank all of you that are online today that have submitted abstracts. We have had a record submission of abstracts, well over 1,100 abstracts this time. And so we have now the enormous task of sifting through the abstracts and preparing the program of the conference. And we will be doing that in the next month. So we are counting on being able to tell all of you that have submitted abstracts what has been the result of that submission by mid-December. Thank you once again to make our conference such a wonderful thing. And now I think most of you will have had time to log in. I can see more people are arriving, but we will start now with welcome to our lovely speakers and introductions. Today with me, I have Bill Yates, who is a dementia advocate. I'll tell you a bit more about Bill in a minute. Sarah Bottomley, who is Director of Patient Recruitment for Parexel, which is a clinical trial organization. Marco Lyons, who is the Global Medical Lead at Alzheimer's Disease for Roche. And Kay Bothinard, who is the Senior Director and Global Lead Alzheimer's Disease Diagnostics at ASI. So it's a really high-level panel of people that do this day in, day out. So any question you have ever had, they are definitely the right person to answer it. So I just want to tell you now a few things about Bill Yates. Bill, who is going to be our first speaker, is a dementia advocate. Some of you will be familiar with Bill. Bill is also on the board of Alzheimer's Disease International. He was elected this year. Congratulations, Bill. And has also been involved with Dementia Alliance International and with Dementia Australia and with many, many other organizations. Bill is originally a graduate of pharmacy, so it's also quite interesting that he is the person speaking today at this particular webinar. And he will share with us his experience of participating in a clinical trial. It's very important that Bill goes first this time because we really need to give a tone to all of this presentation with the actual experience of people on the ground of going through a clinical trial. So with that, Bill, I hand it over to you. And thank you so much for being with us. It's well over past midnight in Australia. Thank you.
Thank you, Paola. And hello to everyone in the audience. In my presentation today, I'll talk about what I learned as probably the most important thing. What did I learn from participating in a clinical trial, and why did I make that decision? Firstly, following my diagnosis of younger onset Alzheimer's disease in August 2019, I made a conscious decision not to allow the fear, the uncertainty, and the stigma attached to this diagnosis to determine how I would live my life. Instead, I began searching for something, anything, that might slow down the progression of this disease and allow me to live my life on my terms. That search took me into the world of dementia research, a journey that has not only given me hope, but restored my sense of purpose. It has shown me that even in the face of loss, there are still possibilities for personal growth. In perhaps the biggest gamble of my life, I made the decision to step away from the traditional amyloid beta and tau hypothesis and enroll in a novel clinical trial that targeted inflammation. The mechanism, I believe, was the trigger for my symptoms. My thinking at this point was simple. If I was going to have any chance of slowing down this disease, then I needed to explore a different mechanism, a new cause, and perhaps a different type of solution. I don't mind admitting that I was also looking for a silver bullet, not because I expected a miracle, but because I needed to find hope in what felt like an impossible situation. As a result, in early 2020, I started as a participant in a Phase 1b open trial, which lasted for 3 months. I then opted to enroll in a further 12-month open trial extension. As my results were quite encouraging, I decided to apply to the Australian government to gain further access to this drug via what we refer to as a special access scheme. This was granted, and it gave me further access. If I now move forward to July this year, this access to this experimental drug suddenly stopped. And the reason for that was that the drug had been in a clinical 2 trial and it simply didn't reach the expectations. After I'd been on this drug for approximately 4.5 years, this decision had an interesting impact on me, something I didn't quite expect. And it took me quite a few months before I recovered and had the confidence now to step back into my life. In telling you my story, I would like to share you some of the learnings that I took away from my involvement in this clinical trial. Let me begin by saying I fully support the need for clinical trials. For me, they are the key to unlocking treatments that can truly alter the course of this devastating and progressive disease. Quite simply, without research, I believe that we cannot make any progress. In saying this, I often reflect on a quote that I came across on the website of Alzheimer's Association. It goes like this: "The first survivor of Alzheimer's is out there, but we won't get there without you." This quote has stayed with me because it reminds me that all of us, whether we are living with dementia, conducting research, providing clinical care, or advocating for change, we are all partners, sharing our information, sharing our experiences, and more importantly, our insights into what we are learning. It is only through a collective effort like this that real breakthroughs are possible. Secondly, part of my clinical trial isn't an easy task, as there are many psychological challenges that you can encounter. I'd just quickly like to talk about them. During the initial screening process, you're constantly reminded of your diagnosis. Each test you undertake brings a confirmation that slowly chips away at your sense of who you were before your diagnosis. I also found that there was a great deal of uncertainty because you don't know whether you're actually receiving the active drug or the placebo. And it might sound unusual, but after you've been on a clinical trial for a number of months, it really weighs on you. Coupled with this anxiety is associated with potential side effects. You start to question whether it's really worth the risk, as we have all read reports of the brain swelling and bleeding that is linked to a number of the new Alzheimer's drugs. Interesting in my case, I was lucky. I only experienced rather severe bradycardia, and I was able to manage it without actually getting a pacemaker, even though I'd actually had to consider it at one point in time. And lastly, the repeated cognitive and clinical assessments can at times become quite confronting. If you can imagine the situation that you do a cognitive test, and then a couple of months later you do it again, but all of a sudden you sort of remember that there's been a change, and that change is a decline. And that simple little bit of information can actually be quite confrontating for you. It's frightening and can lead to frustration. It's for that particular experience, I really found that what you need in clinical trials is a person-centered approach. For me, it isn't optional, it's quite essential. Conducting clinical trials isn't just about collecting data. It's also about treating each participant as a person. Too often people withdraw from clinical trials, not because they lose hope, but because the experience becomes too impersonal. They feel more like a number, not a human being. At Cara Mines is where I was involved in my clinical research. I can honestly say I never felt like a number. I really, from my perspective, I was seen, I was valued, and I was supported. And yes, I will admit that each time that I received my weekly injection, I was given my favorite chocolate. Now that didn't hurt, but it actually built a fair amount of trust that I had. So from my perspective, this ability to have a human connection during the clinical trial is probably the reason that I actually stayed. Around me, I was quite aware of the number of people who were actually dropping out. And it would seem that it was purely based on the fact that they'd sort of given up and there was no one there to sort of motivate them and move them and sort of say, look, how about considering that? Where I've spoken a lot about my involvement in clinical trials, I probably want to broaden the lens just for a moment and talk about the role of people living with dementia, what role they can have in research. In the past 3 years, I've been involved as an associate investigator and a co-designer in quite a few research projects. Each time I've seen how the voices of people living with dementia have helped shape interventions that are not just innovative, but they're truly person-centered. Living experience brings with it a certain degree of authenticity that can't be found in textbooks and definitely not in lab manuals. Finally, from a personal perspective, being involved in dementia research has given me a renewed sense of purpose. It reminds me that I can still make a difference. This sense of agency helps counter the isolation that can come from living with dementia and strengthens my belief in me as a person. It's probably the one thing that I've struggled the most with, but it is also the one thing that I gain the most from my involvement in a clinical trial. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill, for your honest and open discussion about your participation and the things that have made you happy to have been part of it and the things that have been less easy to be part of. I'm sure that after this intervention, a lot of people will have questions. That since today, as we said, we have less panelists, and so for once I have the luxury to be able to ask the follow-up question. I just wanted to ask you one question. If you had one message that you wanted to relay, to convey to the people who design and run clinical trials, what would that one message be?
Paolo, I think it's really important in a clinical trial is to lose the clinical aspect. I understand the importance of collecting data, but for people who are involved in the clinical trial, you're often asked to be there for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And very quickly, you start to see yourself as just not a person anymore. So I would encourage drug companies, I encourage the clinics who are running trials to make that person-centered. Yeah, just make that something real which is happening within the trial. And I point to that very simple thing of the secretary walking up to me and say, Bill, that was great. You did that. Here's your favorite chocolate. That for me built so much trust that I was happy to come back each week.
Thank you ever so much, Bill. This has really been important. Also, the importance of chocolate. We all need incentives and little happy things in our life, especially when we're going through something really, really difficult and stressful. And as you said, also something that caused difficulty from the point of view of your own health and well-being when the outcome also was so uncertain. Now, the context in which we're doing this webinar is that next year, World Alzheimer's Report, which, as you know, is our most important publication yearly, will focus on clinical trials. So this is the first step. We wanted to gather also from you, our audience, what do you think are the issues that we should cover. The report will be done with the help of a journalist. We want it to be written in the easier possible to understand way and to tackle all aspects of clinical trials so that going forward, it will become a point of reference for anyone that wants to join a clinical trial and wants to understand more what this means in Alzheimer's and dementia. So I really cannot thank enough all of our panelists for being part of that first step in trying to understand what our stakeholders need as the most important piece of information. Now I can see that there's quite a lot of comments online. I remind our attendees that if you want to ask questions, please use the question and answer box rather than the chat box. So at the end, I can pick up all of your questions in the same place. Thank you so much. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our second speaker, and that is Sarah Bottomley, who is joining us from the UK today. Sarah is Director of Patient Recruitment at Parexel. Parexel is a clinical research organization, which often is shortened as CRO. So she brings great insight into the running and management of clinical trials. Sarah will be talking today about some of the challenges and opportunities with recruiting into trials for dementia therapies, and also as a global organization, how they see the future of clinical trials in low and middle income countries. And we'll have time to think about that a little bit more perhaps at the end. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and lovely to see everybody today. Thank you so much for having me. If we could go to the next slide, please. And one more. So as mentioned, Parexel is a clinical research organisation. So just to clarify what that means, we don't own or develop any treatments ourselves. We partner with pharmaceutical and biotech companies to help design and manage clinical trials, to ensure that safety, ethics and regulatory compliance is all in place, and to support people living with any conditions, but people with dementia and care partners throughout the research process. So if we could jump to the next slide, please. Just to give you an overview of what clinical trials are, just to kind of level set us. So this is a vital process that aids us in the development and of safe and effective medications, devices, diagnostics and procedures. So it's important to enable us to improve the understanding of medical conditions, discover and verify effective treatments, identify side effects and common side effects that we may need to be aware of, and also look at the risk versus benefit of different treatments as well. And they're run across several phases. So they run right through from phase 1, which is first in human trials, where we assess the safety. And these are sometimes run in healthy volunteers or in people living with different conditions, right the way through to phase 4 trials, which is where all of the other trial phases have taken place. Everything has been assessed in terms of safety, efficacy, common side effects, risk versus benefit, and then we look at kind of the long-term marketing and monitoring of safety. Next slide, please. So there are some very key challenges to clinical trial accessibility, and the main ones are around a general kind of lack of understanding and awareness of dementia not being part of the normal aging process, but also around mistrust and skepticism and fear of what clinical trial participation is as well. So there's those two kind of main areas of misunderstanding and misconception around dementia, but also clinical trials too. There are also inequalities in healthcare systems globally, and this includes infrastructure, diagnostic pathways, resources, and then the critical role of the care partner, which we always need to bear in mind, but is sometimes overlooked in terms of their education, involvement, support, despite the fact that they are a significant part of involvement in clinical research participation. Next slide, please. So in terms of dementia clinical research, in 2025, there are 138 drugs in development through 182 trials. And 74% of those drugs aim to slow or halt progression, which sounds fantastic. But when you think about it from a person perspective and from a clinical trial running perspective, there are, as I mentioned, these accessibility issues that then can lead to a slowing of recruitment of people living with dementia through clinical trials, a high screen failure rate because of the way that we need to assess people to join a clinical trial, but also sometimes because of the way that the trials are developed as well. And then also, as Bill mentioned, a high dropout rate of people who join trials. So about 50% of Alzheimer's disease trial participants don't actually complete all of their study visits. And so this can then ultimately lead to a high overall failure rate and unclear benefits for patients on an ongoing long-term period. Next slide, please. So there are several ways in which we need to work together to continue to build trials in the best possible way, raise awareness and support education, as well as ongoing participation in clinical trials. So I just want to highlight a few elements here. The first one and the most critical is proactive co-design of clinical trials. So working with patients, care partners, trusted patient community members to proactively look at how we can design trials and make sure that not only are they accessible, but they reach the data outcomes that need to be reached so that we have a meaningful outcome for that trial, so that the study runs effectively, it's accessible, but also that the ultimate goal is to have a treatment that's available for patients. Site identification and training is one of the main areas as well, especially when we look at lower and middle income countries. We need to plan for diverse site representation, and that includes onboarding trial naive sites and making sure that we're training people in cultural sensitivity, but also in those misconceptions around dementia being that normal part of aging as well. In terms of kind of education and awareness too, this is a major element around not just the understanding of dementia as not being part of a normal aging process, but also around clinical trial education as well. There needs to be an approach where we don't just utilize, a Facebook advertisement to raise awareness of a clinical trial. We reach people where they are. We engage with people in the right languages, using the right terminology, and we target that outreach at the right communities as well as the care partner, because this is a full kind of family involvement in clinical trial participation, especially in dementia studies. And then when it comes to supporting the ongoing participation in clinical trials as well, there needs to be an understanding of different digital health technologies and decentralized trials, so home nursing options, things like flexible implementation of decentralized clinical trials, depending on a personal approach. So what does each person within that trial need? Do they want someone coming to their house? Are they able to access the different technologies? But then also making sure that they're not out of pocket when it comes to participating as well. So are we able to provide concierge services, reimbursement, meal provisions, childcare support, flexible scheduling? All of these things provide this kind of whole well-rounded process for participating and accessing a clinical trial. Next slide, please. So in my last minute, I want to kind of provide a collective call to action. I know that everyone in this meeting today, everyone that's hearing this recording, is challenging the stigma and raising awareness around dementia and that not being a normal part of the aging process. That also needs to extend to the understanding that clinical research is a viable potential option, and it's something that there is a general, I think, lack of awareness and knowledge around clinical research as well. In addition to that, to the people living with dementia and the care partners listening to this today, please don't be afraid to ask your healthcare team for information about clinical trials, for clinical trial options that might be open to you. While this kind of education and bringing on trial naive sites and things like that continues, patients and people living with dementia and care partners, you are the experts in your own experiences. You are able to advocate for yourself, and I understand that that can be difficult at times, but you can and should continue to do that as we continue to kind of run down this multi-pronged approach of raising awareness as much as possible. And I think that's my last slide. So thank you. I'll take a breath. I know that was a lot of information in a short time.
Sarah, thank you so much. This was a super clear presentation, and I hope people really got from your slides the whole process of what is happening in a clinical trial, which is what we asked you to present. Clinical trials are a difficult thing, and there is a lot of uncertainty, you know, for people that are undergoing what Bill has gone through. There are so many obstacles, from primary healthcare practitioners not really knowing about the disease itself, not really knowing that clinical trials exist, to obviously worries, as Bill suggested, about the type of clinical trial, whether you're going to be in a placebo group or not. What's going to happen if this is going to be withdrawn? What are the risks? And there has been a lot of discussion online whilst you spoke about, you know, the kind of information that we give to people. And we will pick up some of those conversations later. But one question that I wanted to ask you in particular, because I know there's a lot of people listening to us from low and middle income country, it's what, with most trials taking place in high income countries, for a number of reasons that you may also want to talk about, what do you see as the biggest challenge to hosting trials in lower resource settings? And what could be changed to allow for more clinical trial accessibility in lower and middle income countries? What's your experience of that?
I think the biggest challenge continues to be around site awareness and access. So they're often, more often than not, for speed of setup of clinical trials and things like that, studies are run in larger cities rather than smaller community hospitals, for example. So training and supporting the onboarding of clinical trial naive sites is a critical way to provide better accessibility across the world. But that also comes with its own challenges. You know, that takes more time. PowerExcel, for example, we run PowerExcel Academy. So we onboard trial naive sites and trial naive investigators. And this is something that, as I say, it takes time. So when you've got a clinical trial that you're trying to set up quickly, that's not always necessarily the priority. However, I think this is something that needs to be kind of prioritized, more and more across the board. But with that, there's also kind of potential resourcing issues as well at those sites. So there needs to be support mechanisms in place when they're running clinical trials, with things like clinical trial enrollment managers that can help support those sites in looking through their databases for participants and helping reaching out to the community. And so this allows us to make those trials more accessible by having more local sites available in lower middle income countries. But then there's also the element of public education and the importance around understanding clinical trials as a treatment option. So it's not guaranteed that it's going to work or not work for you. As we heard from Bill, there may be a placebo element involved, but it's around having a better communication and education strategy in place so that we're not focusing on each individual trial on its own. We're focusing on empowering people who are living with dementia and care partners to truly understand what clinical trials are and how they can access them, so that we're looking at that from kind of the support of the sites, but also from the support of the public and people living with dementia and care partners as well.
Such a good point and such a good answer. Thank you, Sarah. I was reminded when you were talking about the fact that trials are often located in cities about a webinar we held about 8 years ago when we first started talking about the importance of patient centricity in clinical trials. And I have to say, it's great to see today your presentation, because a lot of the points that were made then have now become mainstream points. And in that particular occasion, the person that had undergone clinical trials had been in a remote rural part, and one of the points was transportation. So if you have got dementia sometimes you have spatial awareness issues, and it's very difficult to navigate. And for them, the journey to and from this clinical trial was well over an hour, and they needed transport, and they needed to be sure that they could get in and out from there. And that had been a deterrent to other people they had known from participating. So to know what is that people need and to act upon those needs then would make it so much easier. It's clear from what you say that you lose so much time and so much resources also in if you have a loss of 50% of people coming to a trial. So this is something also to bear into perspective. There's a lot of questions coming up, but now we're going to move swiftly on with our webinar. And the next person I'm going to introduce to you is Marco Lyons. Marco is the global medical lead of Alzheimer's disease at Roche, and he will comment on the future of drug development and how Roche works with patients and advocacy groups to ensure that they capture community insights into the work that they do. Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bella, for the lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you again. Yeah, so I work at Roche. I'm the global medical lead for Alzheimer's there. Roche is an organization that's based in Switzerland. I'd like to spend the next couple of minutes giving you an overview about Roche and Alzheimer's disease, our approach to working in this space, and also a little bit on our hope for progress in the future. So to start with Roche's commitment to Alzheimer's disease, we've been working in this space for quite some time now, more than 2 decades of scientific research in Alzheimer's disease. We have 2 main businesses, so to speak. So we have our pharmaceutical business, which looks at developing medicines. Our focus here is on clinical trials and trying to identify potential options that can help people with Alzheimer's disease. And then in our diagnostics business, we're working to develop tests or diagnostics that support the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And we have both options for diagnosis available on the market, as well as research options that hope to streamline that route to diagnosis for the future. At Roche, we want to, and we're privileged to be able to work with the community in what we do. We strive to be more than a research organization. We want to be a partner that people can trust. This has been a long journey. We recognize it's a long journey, but it is a journey that we are committed to. And with that, we invest in collaborations and in partnerships that help us achieve that. And we're grateful for the continued willingness that you have to work with us. So I want to touch now on how we learn from the community and our approach to working with the community. And really, it's to highlight that this is guided by lived experiences. We really try to learn and understand what truly matters to people living with Alzheimer's disease. And through recent initiatives, we've partnered with patient organizations. We've also partnered with people with lived experiences of Alzheimer's disease. And through those collaborations and partnerships, it's really reshaped how we work. So some examples that I'd like to highlight. We've been looking a lot recently over the past years today and hopefully in the future as well about making clinical trials more inclusive and more accessible. And some of the initiatives that have helped us in that regard are through collaborations with patient groups. So we collaborated with a group that we called the FAST Council. So FAST stands for Finding Alzheimer's Solutions Together. And some of these initiatives really looked at defining principles for how pharmaceutical companies and patient organizations can work together on these types of initiatives, and how we together can learn and shape ultimately the way in which we conduct our clinical trials. And we also worked on developing clinical trial guidebooks. And these look at identifying potential barriers to participating in research, how to develop clinical trials that incorporates lived experience, and things to be mindful of when you're setting up such trials. These two reports, for example, they have been published and they should actually be available on the ADI website either later today or in the days to come if ever you want to look at it in more detail. But it's really helped us kind of shape what we want to do, and also to simplify the way in which individuals might participate in the trials that we conduct. We know that screening processes, for example, in clinical trials can be long. Um, Ultimately, it will result in identifying those that are suitable for the study. It also results in identifying individuals that are not suitable. And we know that that can be a bit disheartening when you get to the end of a screening process and that study is not right for you. So we're looking at ways of reducing burden as early as possible and identifying individuals that might be successful candidates in different mechanisms. Another thing that has been really important for us to learn along this way and then use to shape future work is choosing words and language. So education, as I think was touched on by Sarah and Bill alluded to it too, informing individuals about what it takes to participate in the trial, what to expect, what the trial is aiming to do, and being fully on board with what is going to happen is so important from the beginning. And then actually collaborating with people that have lived experiences for Alzheimer's disease can help you shape those educational materials. They can help you tailor the language that resonates and makes sense as best as possible. So we also try and embark on doing that as well. Moving now a little bit to some of the considerations that we have for future research aspects at Roche for our drug development. Some of the things that we've been looking at recently are similar to other companies, which are looking at developing drugs that can target the removal of amyloid. We know from recently approved drugs that removing amyloid from the brain is a validated target that we believe results in kind of slowing down the disease or halting the progression, as was mentioned earlier. Our brains, however, they have blood-brain barriers, and those blood-brain barriers act to kind of help keep harmful substances out. And with that, sometimes not all of the medicines that we give that ultimately are to get to the brain get through. So one of the things we've been researching at Roche are technologies that can help these drugs get into the brain more readily. And the ambition here is to remove amyloid more effectively. We're also researching whether the speed of removing amyloid can influence the impact of slowing the disease. And again, this is an area that we're following and we're trying to find out if the impact is as such. So amyloid as a target remains to be an important component that we're focusing on. We're also open to non-amyloid targets, albeit our research is much earlier in that regard. But as we learn, we're committed to sharing and we hope to be able to do so in due course. So in summary, if I was to conclude, our approach at Roche is grounded in working with the Alzheimer's community. Through these collaborations and partnerships, we can improve the way in which we conduct our research and hopefully making our trials more inclusive and more accessible. And our hope for the future is that the use maybe of these new technologies might help get more drug into the brain, and if we can demonstrate the outcome of that, we hope to be able to share that as well. So I'll stop there. I think I've gone slightly over time, Paula. Apologies for that, but thank you so much for the time that I had.
Marco, thank you so much. This is so interesting. And you have been very wonderful in your explanation, but perhaps if also me to explain a little bit better, Marco has mentioned a couple of really important studies that Roche is doing, which are the brain shuttle technology study, which he was mentioning when he was talking about the blood-brain barrier, the traveler study, which is about absorption. Marco, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because those are terms that our audience will have heard, but they don't quite understand necessarily how each one of them will work. Or can you not talk about it right now?
Yeah, sure. So the technology, as you mentioned, is called the brain shuttle technology. We have conducted kind of a phase 1B, 2A study that looked at the use of this technology. From that, we've now actually initiated a phase 3 study. So we've moved into the third phase. And that study is ongoing. It's just started. So we hope to be able to investigate whether this molecule can provide an effective and safe treatment option for people with Alzheimer's disease. It'll take us some time to conduct that study, but as soon as we can get the results and conclude them, we will share them as we are traditionally kind of committed to doing so.
Thank you so much, Marco. And for those that have followed us for many years, you can see now what happens when therapies start coming into market. And of course, at the beginning, there is just a few. And then now we are already seeing things being refined in a way that the delivery also of therapy can improve. So this is extremely interesting to hear from Marco, which is at the cutting edge of developing this new technology. Marco, before I let you go, can I also ask you, because we've been talking about global access to clinical trials and to new therapies, how do you see the future developing, and what role do you think industry like yours can play in the having more access to this?
Yeah, thanks, Paula. It's a great question, and it's something that we do challenge ourselves to work on, quite frequently at Roche, and I'm sure other companies as well that are working in the clinical trial space. I think one of the things that we're trying to do is to streamline how you can get into a study. It requires getting into a clinical study requires an individual to go through a variety of tests and screens and be this blood tests or brain scans or cognitive assessments, whatever it might be. So there is a lot that you go through. So any method or technique that can reduce that burden where it would be unnecessary is I think very much welcomed by the patient community in terms of engagement with the clinical trial process, as well as just preparation for likeliness of success. So we're looking at ways in which we can kind of make quicker decisions on whether someone might be a suitable candidate or not, to avoid having to go through that lengthy screening processes unnecessarily. So I think that's one point. I think another point is actually also about accessibility to clinical trials. So we heard earlier that often trials are conducted in cities, big established cities, and there might be established clinical trial sites at certain hospitals that reach the specific catchment area. Ways in which we can go into the community and get more access or broadening that funnel, I think ultimately helps different types of people that wouldn't traditionally present for clinical trials get more use out of that avenue. So we're also looking at ways in which we can bring that to the community to try and capture a different population and make it, again, as I said, more accessible. And I think pharmaceutical companies in partnership with their sites that are conducting these studies can work together to find techniques that can do things that are bespoke for that locality to achieve that.
Thank you very much, Marco. That's a great answer. I can see that more questions are coming into the chat line, so we'll have time to explore some of these in greater depth. In the meantime, I see that in the chat line, Janice has been posting the report that Marco was mentioning earlier. Thank you very much, Janice, for doing that. Now I am going to introduce you to our fourth speaker, who in the meantime will unmute herself. And that is Kay Bothinard, who is the Senior Director and Global Lead for Alzheimer's Disease Diagnostics at ASI. As many of you know already, ASI is one of the few companies that actually has a therapy that has been approved in several countries. And we are delighted that Kay is here with us today and able to comment on what happens next to make sure that the people who need these new treatments are able to access them. And you know that a lot of the work that we've been doing this year has been around access. We are very concerned that there are great inequality and disparities of access across the world. And this is creating a lot of issues in our community. So I'm absolutely delighted now to give the floor to Kay. Kay, over to you.
Thank you, Paola. Thank you for that introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone from around the world. It's a pleasure to be here. And I will talk a bit about some excellent work that's being done in healthcare systems to improve access to Alzheimer's disease care, and also by extension, access to clinical trials. I do work for ASI, as Paola had mentioned, and we do have an anti-amyloid therapy on the market in the US and other markets around the world. I will not be talking about that today. My focus will be on the larger Alzheimer's disease treatment pathway context. So I just want to be clear about that. Next slide, please. So the anti-amyloid therapies are new. Marco had mentioned that. And as in the last couple of years, there have been 2 drugs that have come to market, and there are others that are in the pipeline, currently in clinical trials and enrolling in clinical trials. And in this context, health systems are evolving their memory care infrastructure in their systems to better identify people with Alzheimer's who may need treatment, and then by extension, who may be interested in clinical trials. Now, there are a couple of challenges, or several challenges to this, as you know. I've kind of categorized these into a few different buckets. And for patient identification, there is a lack of awareness, especially at the PCP and GP level. Memory issues are often dismissed as a part of normal aging, and so patients get overlooked and they get missed. And there's also stigma associated with Alzheimer's, and patients may not want to be worked up for an Alzheimer's disease diagnosis. So there's education, that's an issue here, and also the larger context, that's an issue. The other challenges are within the healthcare system itself. So sort of the nuts and bolts of the healthcare system don't work in the way that they need to help patients get identified. Referral pathways may be unclear for Alzheimer's disease, and staff may not be adequately trained to support the identification of Alzheimer's patients. So as these health systems seek to make these changes, that this will benefit not only those who are seeking treatment, but also those who are interested in participating in clinical trials. And what I'll do today is highlight one of these systems as an example. This particular example comes from a larger initiative that's been taking place in the United States. And I'll just highlight one that might be not necessarily representative, but I think interesting to those of you on this webinar. So next slide. So Memorial Healthcare is in the state of Michigan in the United States. And Michigan holds the distinction of being a state that looks like a mitten, if you see here at the top. It is in the Midwestern United States. Just to the left of it is Lake Michigan, and then to the left of that is the city of Chicago. So if you're familiar with the U.S. geography, that's kind of where it's located. And if you look at that mitten at the top, in the middle of that page, you see Detroit in the lower right-hand corner in the yellow square there. That's where the U.S. Automotive industry was born. And then where Memorial Healthcare is in that blue circle. And if you can zoom in at the bottom there, the largest city in that blue circle is Lansing, Michigan. It is a fairly rural area, and that blue circle represents the whole catchment area for the Memorial Healthcare system. So it's serving rural populations. It is the only hospital provider in that particular county, and it's partnered with a number of other organizations. You see the list there. Most of that is primary care, family medicine. There is a memory care clinic in that area. And that's the only memory care clinic with neurological services within a 20-mile radius. So it's not, at all an urban geography. And so patients don't necessarily have a lot of options, and it can be difficult to get to see a specialist that might know something about Alzheimer's. So that's the context that we're working in. There is, you see on the slide here a couple of times in that paragraph at the bottom, the letters BHN. BHN stands for Brain Health Navigator, and that is the program that Memorial Healthcare has piloted and is rolling out in their primary care system, and that's been taking place over the last couple of years. So the next slide shows you a little bit more detail about this. And if we could go, yeah, thank you. So just to give you an overview of the Memorial's Brain Health Navigator program, I'll break this slide up into two rows here. So that first row really deals with the people aspect of the model, and the bottom row deals with the systems aspect of the model. I think the people aspect here is really relevant and can be applied to healthcare systems around the globe because it's about education and staffing. The systems is a little bit more U.S. specific because it's dealing with, this lives inside the U.S. healthcare system. So there are peculiarities to that may not be relevant to other markets. So from a people point of view, what Memorial did at the beginning of this was they placed a nurse who understood how a Alzheimer's disease patient might move through the primary care system. He or she, was tasked with making appropriate referrals to neurology and raising issues and trying to find resources when concerns came up. This nurse was initially planned to be a part-time nurse embedded in the primary care system, but it became pretty clear pretty quickly that this person needed to be a full-time resource dedicated to memory care to serve patients. And so with that, as time went on, as this evolved, that nurse, that registered nurse, with this primary care experience, received additional training. In this case, it was 2 weeks of neurology training. They were trained on the cognitive assessments, MMSE and MoCA. There were customized templates that were developed to capture patient history so that would be useful later on down the line when they were referred to or potentially referred to neurology. And then they were also participated in community organization meetings to get the word out. So there was a fair amount of effort dedicated to this, and they have it in a place now where it's been working pretty well. It's been supported by all the things you see on the bottom there from the systems point of view. I will not go into that because that probably isn't relevant to many of you on this webinar. What we can do, though, is go to the next slide, which shows a map of how patients now at this point move through the Memorial Healthcare system. So the big kind of initial big section on the left-hand side here is all representing primary care, family practice. And if we start at the top there, patients enter into that, enter into the BHN model, the Brain Health Navigator model, through either a annual visit when their cognitive screening comes back as abnormal, or a caregiver or patient who reports cognitive concerns. They come into the primary care setting, and the primary care physician will refer that patient to a brain health navigator. So this goes to that nurse who's been trained to work up a patient based on the protocol that's been developed. You see that arrow going down. The BHN conducts the detailed history. So they assess that patient. They give them a cognitive assessment, and that goes on to additional assessments into that box in the right that starts with PHQ-9. They look at their medications. They look at the sleep apnea. They look at labs that may be reversible. That may indicate reversible causes of cognitive impairment as well. And if they are abnormal, they go up in that left-hand arrow. They get treated accordingly. If there's no improvement, they then go on to an MRI, blood markers for AD, and then go on to secondary care out of that. If after that assessment that in the bottom there, that includes the test and the medication review and the sleep apnea assessment, if they're still normal, they they will still go to get the MRI and the BBMs. And so the results of the BBMs and the MRIs will determine their pathway through secondary care, as you can see there. So that the secondary care and the treatment follow-up is actually not changed really at all in any significant way in the Memorial Healthcare System. What's new are those rectangular boxes that you see on this page. It's the PCP referral to the Brain Health Navigator. It's the work that the Brain Health Navigator does, and the MRI and the BBMs that actually were not part of the primary care referral process before the Brain Health Navigator model was instituted. So these three particular pieces are what's new and what's really helped Memorial to make that workup in the PCP more effective at identifying patients who need to be looked at more closely. And the backdrop of this, some of you may be aware, there was a paper published back in 2024, I believe it was, that looked at U.S. Medicare claims. And what it found was that in the PCP setting, about 90% of patients with cognitive impairment, with mild cognitive impairment, who went to the PCP were missed. So this is precisely what the Brain Health Navigator model is looking to address. Getting that 90% down to something much more manageable. It's still going to be a big number, likely, until this model gets really, really adopted into the system. But this is the kind of work that's being done on the ground so that patients are identified and treated more effectively and moved on to secondary care, where there are protocols that are in place to get patients onto therapy or onto clinical trials.
Okay,
So
I need
next,
to speed you up, unfortunately, because we have
okay.
a few minutes over time. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next slide is just talking about some of the opportunities and challenges that were found in the Memorial system. Primary care being engaged was both an opportunity and a challenge. There's a lot of education that needed to be done, and there was a lot of success as well. So that work is ongoing. The crosstalk across departments, as you can imagine, instituting anything new is a challenge, and so making sure that happened was one of the key things that needed to be addressed and is still being addressed. it's good to have cognitive screening more embedded in primary care. It's good to be better at triaging referrals. That was really successful for Memorial. And then this really expanded the pool of patients who are considered, who were worked up for potential cognitive issues, including Alzheimer's disease. So, you know, and the challenges that you see there on the right, some of them are systems related, but some of them are common to pretty much all healthcare systems, we believe, and then they continue to be, you know, addressed in the next phase of this work. And that is, I think that's the end of my slides here. And I do apologize for going a little bit over, but wanted to take the time and explain that to you. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Kay, it was helpful because this actually shows our audience how an actual system is actually working. Let's all remember that the US has now been implementing the new therapies for quite some time, and there have been challenges. There have been issues about where to also locate these centers, how to get people to the centers, how to use existing facilities that could be improved in order to be able to process. So all these process flowcharts tell you a lot about how actually this works. Okay, I had a few questions for you, but I will hold off them because we have a question in the chat line for you specifically. But if you can keep it short so that we do have your answer, because we got time for the other speakers. In Brain Health Navigator model, is RN ordering for BBM for AD and MRI? And if you can explain some of those acronyms also, that would be helpful for the rest of the audience that may not know what they are.
Yeah, so the RN is in the US system is a registered nurse. And he or she can order the blood marker, the blood test for Alzheimer's disease, as well as the MRI.
Thank you so much. That is really, really helpful. There is an interesting question here, which I think probably everybody on the panel could try to get their hands on. Do we yet, or might we ever be able to have a mechanism where the cumulative result of screening and assessment of people in the existing pipeline trials are centralized? Even if after such workups a person does not proceed or should withdraw, their initial findings are critical and helpful. Would a registry of such open data be beneficial and meaningful in the future? Let's not focus at the moment on the governance challenges, but rather on the possible value. Now, I think what the person that is asking is, let's not worry about the complexity, but let's look in this answer about would there be a value in these? And as you know, at ADI, we've been working a lot about Area 6 of the Global Action Plan, which is about sharing of data. And this has been a concern of us for years, that so many studies and things happen, but not necessarily the results from those are used. So I would like all the panel speakers, starting from Bill and then Sarah and Marco and Kay, to briefly tackle this question. What do you think about this? And please unmute yourself.
I think bar the complexities, having a central database would have to be helpful in actually being able to address issues as they came up. So I see it, but I'm unsure about it.
Thank you very much. Sarah?
I think that the more data that is shared across the industry, the better. You know, the more learnings that everybody can take from all the research that's being done, from all the assessments that are being done and everything else, the better. It's a shared goal to provide more people with more treatment options, right? So if there was an opportunity, there would be a lot of complexities. If there was an opportunity to be able to share that data, I can't see there not being a benefit to that.
Thank you so much. Marco?
I agree with Sarah's comment there about the more we share, the better the outcome can ultimately be. I think registries at a national level, so coordinating national registries, is critically important to understand individuals with Alzheimer's disease within the country. But then the next level is allowing those national registries to speak with other national registries. And there is some work already ongoing to try and make that become a reality, such as the International Alzheimer's Disease Registry. There is complexities with getting screening outcomes from clinical trials into registries, and whether that is permissible. But if the complexities can be overcome and it's possible to do it, then I think it would be beneficial.
Thank you very much, Marco. We still see a lot of overlap, and things being announced seem to be in contradictions with others. From our viewpoint, this is very difficult, especially the international coordination. Kay?
I agree. And, in the spirit of sharing, there's so many trials that have been done in Alzheimer's disease. Many of them have failed. But in the spirit of sharing, those companies, a number of those companies with those failed trials have shared that data. That's actually been really useful to look at as a community, and there's a lot of value in that. I agree.
Thank you so much, Kay. That it's useful. I mean, I think this is the holy grail. We all would like more data to be shared, but there are complexities. So the governance issue we can't quite ignore it. That is where the complexities are. I would like the panel now to tackle another question. Very briefly, the reply, because there is a third question I'd like to tackle to later. What types of digital tools or research infrastructures are most urgently needed to support earlier detection and more representative clinical trials? Can I ask Marco first, then Sarah, then Kay?
So I think the use of digital tools can help in a variety of aspects. It can help identify individuals that don't have cognitive decline, but might be biologically with markers of an amyloid pathology. And that can aid identifying individuals for the preclinical studies. But we're also seeing technologies such as voice biomarkers that are being developed that can also show promise on a more wider spread approach. So I think the space is rapidly evolving, and these would be very welcomed, especially from remote assessment opportunities for clinical trials and then ultimately in clinical practice.
Thank you so much. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think that the option of providing digital assessments and access to that digital side of things is great. It means that there are more opportunities to gather information on a wider scale as well. There are, again, complexities with that when you think about especially kind of lower middle income countries where maybe there isn't the opportunity to have Wi-Fi available all the time. So if somebody is taking something home and they need to be able to complete assessments digitally, but they're not able to do that because they don't have the right technology or whatever that looks like, there are issues to overcome there. But I definitely think, the more that we can do in that space and the more accessible that can become, the better.
And thank you, Sarah. And Kay, do you have some words on this?
Yeah, we look at tools that might help, especially in clinical care where physicians are often pressed for time. So if there is something that a patient could do at home, let's say before they came to see a doctor, or that might prompt them to see a doctor, that would be very, very useful. And in this population, something that's easy, digitally easy for them, as well as language independent, would be very, very useful as well.
Thank you very much. Very good point. The language dependency. This sort of leads us to the last question, which I would like all panelists to answer. There's a lot of questions around this topic, which is how can we reach out, I presume, to you as companies, individuals, so that the patients of this medical professional that is asking the question, the various one that have, can enroll in your research clinical trials. But this is a medical professional that wants to know, how do I find out about clinical trials? So can we start with Sarah first, then Bill, then Kay, then Marco, please?
Absolutely. So I think there's, first and foremost, it's a case of kind of utilizing the tools that are out there in terms of understanding what clinical trials are available. If this particular medical professional hasn't worked within clinical research before, there are training programs and support mechanisms available across the industry. Parexel provide it as well, where we can help onboard and train sites and healthcare professionals in accessing, clinical trials and being able to run those themselves as well. So that's kind of, I think, the first key point in being able to run those trials.
Thank you very much. And Bill?
I'm part of another organization called Step Up, and they tackle the problem from a different angle, where people who would like to be involved in clinical trials actually register with us. And then we then have our own database of thousands of people throughout Australia. And then if you're running a trial, you can then make application for us to see whether we've got any participants who match your criteria. And it's like a cross match. And then you send out an email and say, look, this trial is actually running. Would you like to be part of it? So we actually do it a different way. It's actually working quite well.
Thank you very much, Bill. So Kay, very quickly, and Marco, because we're running out of time.
Sure. Clinicaltrials.gov is a great resource for there are searches you can do for what disease area you're looking for clinical trials in, what stage they're in. You can filter on those that are enrolling. It'll give you a list of all the clinical trial sites that are in that study. So that's a place where one could do research.
Thank you. And Marco?
The only additional thing I would add is getting familiar with clinical trial networks within your country or region. There are often established networks that are looking to either grow their network or diversify it for different skills. So approaching it from that angle as well can identify opportunities.
Thank you very much. So I thank my panelists for being with me today. The last thing I would like to say to the many other people that posted questions, many of you had questions about treatment and what treatment works. Can I please suggest that all of those that had this question, please refer to the end of year forecast video from last year with Jeff Cummins, where we tackled a lot of those topics that you are talking about. That was tackled in another webinar, and hopefully somebody in the team will be able to post the link to that video on YouTube now. There's also been a lot of questions around diagnostics. Now, the diagnostics will be tackled in this webinar that we are hosting next month. So please do register for that webinar with Dr. Ali Reza Atri, where I will be talking to Dr. Atri about everything in the space of diagnostics for Alzheimer's and dementia, and a lot is happening. Thank you so much for my panelists for their candor and openness in discussing what is a really difficult subject. I think from the tone of your questions, we did understand a little bit more also about what the audience is interested in particular, where can you find out about clinical trial? There was also something about what is the best way to talk to patients about the possibility of undergoing clinical trial. And we hope that some of the material that we have posted will be useful in helping you also tackle those kind of questions. But most importantly, please wait for the World Alzheimer's Report next September, where we will tackle this topic more fully, of course. But in the meantime, there's plenty of material on our website that should help you. Thank you very much for following us online. You can continue to follow ADI. You have all the addresses there. Thank you and goodbye.